Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Houses of Darkness, Volume 3, Story Number 1. I've had experiences with ghosts in the past. This is why I lived in Bellefontaine, Ohio. My house was haunted by whom? I don't know. I tried researching the house, which was built around 1900, but couldn't find much information. For some reason, I always had this feeling the original house burnt down and the current house was rebuilt on the lot in 1900. The house was on the market for a good 6 months before we bought it. It was our first house and we moved in Christmas Eve day of 1995. For the first few months, we would hear strange noises. We chalked it up to mice or the house settling, then thumpings, knockings in the walls, and drops in temperature. In fact, we tried to get the furnace replaced under the home warranty, but it was a brand new Lennox furnace that worked perfectly, according to the repairman. Then, in February of 1996, we had our first thought that the house was haunted. It was 7 a.m. and our bedroom door was closed, and someone, or something, knocked on the door like how a child would before entering their parents' room. My husband and I have no children. I told my husband, "Someone just knocked on the door." He woke up and said, "Okay." Like, I need to be checking out those mental hospitals today for my wife. Then it knocked again. And I said, "What else? Come in." And my husband opened the door. No one was there. Then other things would happen. For example, we always had a problem with bats flying into our house. Then the footsteps would start, usually running like in a panic down the hallway and down the stairs. The dog would growl at midair. By the way, my dog has not growled at thin air since we moved out of the house in December of 1998. The dog absolutely refused to go to the basement and would wet herself and then try to bite if anyone attempted to force her. On another occasion, I was on the phone with my mother-in-law and my dog was barking at thin air again. Her toy tennis ball that was lying in the other room was thrown or kicked at her by something. She yelped from it hitting her and ran and hid. I would take a bath and would feel someone watching me, or there would be footsteps in the hall, and the bathroom door knob would jiggle when I was home alone. The most frightening experience I encountered was one night at maybe 8:30 p.m. I went upstairs to bed. I'd just gotten snuggled in when the temperature in the room dropped. The bedroom door was closed, and as before there was the knock. I said, "Honey, why are you knocking?" Then the knocking furiously increased to a pounding, urgent, and the doorknob was jiggling like someone was trying to open the door due to some sort of emergency. My husband was downstairs watching TV and heard this and me yelling for him and ran upstairs. The pounding stopped as soon as he crested the stairs. My husband flung open the door and yelled at me, "What the hell are you doing up here?" He then realized that it was not me pounding on the door, because I was still in bed, and there was no way I could have gotten from across the room and into bed in a short amount of time from when the pounding stopped to him opening the door. I then told him, "That's it, we are moving," which we finally did about a year later. The door knocking stopped after that incident. My friend Jen witnessed the kitchen faucets turning on full blast by unseen hands, which freaked her out. Then one day my mom came over, and as we were walking up the sidewalk, something pushed me from behind. All I felt was this ice-cold hand push me. It took days for the ice-cold handprint feeling to subside. My mother, by the way, witnessed this thing pushing me. I didn't trip. My mom said it looked like someone came up and just pushed me, the force causing me to fall forward. One time in my haunted house, I was standing in the foyer and heard the footsteps again. The footsteps sounded like how a child might gallop or skip down steps very fast. I watched the staircase but never saw anything, but halfway down the steps, it just stopped. My friend suggested that it was a child ghost going down the steps and then sliding down the banister. Once we moved, all those things stopped, so it definitely was the house. Next story. I worked for a few years cleaning a transmission parts plant at night. I worked a third shift there. There were a lot of noises and things going on all the time, which were normal. But gradually, night after night, I began to hear and see things that were not normal. I would hear very loudly sounds which might be normal in the day during work, but as I would approach the area, it would stop. The unmistakable sound of large metal parts being thrown into the metal bins, this sort of thing became almost common. Then I began to see a person in the plant. I would catch a glimpse of him and look to see no one. It would always happen in the same area. He had on a blue shirt, dark pants, and had dark hair. Again, this got very common to me. After so many nights of seeing this person out of the corner of my eye in the same location, it became common. Then one night I was pushed over the edge. My job required laying down a lot of absorbent kitty litter type stuff and sweeping it up. I was sweeping around this one machine and I heard someone walk up. A person walking on kitty litter. I didn't stop because I figured it was my boss. After a moment I heard, "Hey." I stopped and looked up and there was no one there. I laid down my broom for a moment and walked away, then decided to get back to work. After a few moments, I heard someone walk up again and then say quite loudly, "Hey!" I looked up and there was no one there. I laid my broom down and left. Outside, I realized I could not explain to my boss that I had walked off the job because of a ghost. I eventually went back in and finished the job without incident. Later, a girl came in one night to help me. She had worked there for a long time before me. She said she'd never do it again, but had agreed to help me that night. Before she left, I had to ask, "Did you ever see anything unusual?" She said yes. She said that's why she refused to work there anymore. I asked the foreman one morning if he knew anything about it. He looked at me like I was a nut. I'm not prone to this sort of encounter, and this is the only thing like this that's ever happened to me. Next story. One night I was staying over at my boyfriend's house. He rented a small, nondescript, older house in an urban neighborhood. I had not stayed overnight at his house more than a handful of times and never had any strange feelings or experiences. This night, though, I was sleeping backwards on the bed with my head at the footboard and my feet pointing towards the headboard. When out of a deep sleep, I simply opened my eyes full awake. I looked to my right, and standing beside the bed looking down at me, making complete eye contact, was a man. The room was very dark, and he glowed with his own light. I could see his features clearly. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, and his face was drawn and thin. He had a scraggly, undernourished beard and was wearing a faded gray shirt and pants. He looked like a young man that had prematurely aged. Our eyes locked for 10 seconds, which was a long time. I was extremely confused and alarmed. I was not sure where I was, and my body seemed completely paralyzed. He was looking at me, unsmiling, his eyes intently boring into mine. The seconds ticked by. I was thinking, if this guy makes one move, I'm going to explode. I was prepared to defend myself, but I was not sure if I could even move. My body was frozen. Who was this guy? I was extremely alarmed. It occurred to me later that the man looked like a Civil War soldier with his gray uniform and battle-worn appearance. He stood there looking down at me until suddenly his body rose up towards the ceiling, then over and almost on top of me. Hovering right over me, head to toe less than 1 foot apart, his face directly over mine. His mouth was now downturned and suddenly contemptuous. He squinted like he was saying, "So long, lady," and he floated straight back to the headboard and dissolved in a pool of greenish light. I lay there in shock and waited for something else weird to happen. I could move my left arm now and felt my boyfriend asleep at my side. He had not awakened. Then I knew where I was and my heart started going ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. I was terribly frightened. The next morning I told my boyfriend about my encounter, but it was strange because he didn't want to talk about it. Years later, it occurred to me that maybe he had also had some experiences in that bedroom because he always slept with all the lights blazing. Next story. I fooled around with some voodoo, not thinking that it was real, and 2 years later something happened. For 3 nights, I was visited by what I thought was a young girl in need of help. The first night, wild hallucinations, regular faces turning into creatures, a guy hanging himself from a chandelier, sexually explicit acts, etc. The second night, motion picture of the girl's ordeal of partying with two gay men who raped and beat her to death. No sound but color. Motion picture style. The third night, she manifested with another little girl and pointed to the ceiling to reveal a slideshow of family photos. She never spoke except what I believe I heard coming from my husband's snore. Mama. Yes, my husband was in a deep sleep all 3 nights while I was talking aloud. I was so tired from being up for 3 nights that I began to hear voices in my head, and I realized that there was more than one presence in the house. We set up a video camera and went to the hotel. I was completely freaked out when I realized that in my dreams the presence was still with me. Still, there was no sound, but each one introduced themselves. The one girl told me, "I hate you, bitch." They allowed me to sleep maybe 3 hours that evening, with frequent interruptions of singing through the air vents at the motel. Go back to sleep, sleep. Go back to sleep, sleep. They said they knew about the video camera and that I was going to get the investigators. When I returned home, I had my husband sleep on one side and my son on the other. Since I had been up for 4 days now, with only 3 hours sleep, I was catching a cold and was having coughing fits. I was mocked. It was 12 a.m., and I told my son to drive me to my grandmother's house, and that I didn't know why, but I knew that if I stayed, something bad was going to happen to me. My husband said that just 20 minutes after we left, he had to get up to see about a loud crash he heard in the kitchen. He said it turned out to be nothing, and he slept that night. During the 40-minute drive to my grandmother's house, I felt like something was in the back seat, and the whole way I kept saying the Lord's Prayer. After the first 15 minutes, the feeling was gone. My grandmother's a Southern Baptist. Nothing bothered me there, but I was a mess, and my whole family rallied to get me help. I went to 3 doctors who all found nothing physically wrong with me. I ended up with Remeron sleeping pills. After a week, my grandmother said that I needed to go home. A Catholic priest blessed our house, but I was still afraid and always felt a presence. My father and his wife visited a week after that and stayed in our room. She is Catholic, and she also heard a person walk down the hallway and stand at the bedroom door several times that evening, but she said her rosary and it stopped. Around 1 a.m. that same evening downstairs, where my husband, my son, and I slept, my son and I both had dreams. In my son's dream, a dark shadow was walking down our stairs carrying a wine bottle. In my dream, someone unearthed the voodoo doll that I buried 2 years ago by the pond that I have in my backyard. That day, my father and his wife were putting a puzzle together in our living room, so I decided to go on the computer to check our emails. I began to answer someone in the message board at some paranormal site, and there was a loud thump on the wall behind the computer and then a force. I was resting my leg up on the table, and it was as if something was pushing the whole table against my leg. I checked with everyone in the house, and everyone thought somebody dropped something heavy or something. I went out to the deck later to smoke, and my dog was sniffing the chair directly across from me and then cowered away. That was the week of April the 8th. Since then I prayed, and I prayed. I kept a white candle burning the whole time I was at home, and I have crosses in every room. I don't stay home unless someone else is there. I don't work, so I just drive around. Basically, I have no life. And our house is now up for sale. I've done everything the paranormal website said. Brooms, hazelnuts, dirt to cemetery, everything. Things are getting better, but I know it's still there. There are still wrappings here and there. My computer acts up. The dog acts funny. And just last night, I had more sex dreams. What am I dealing with? How do I undo what I've done? Do they want me, or have I just opened up a portal here at this house? Will moving help? My husband and son do not get it. This subject sometimes causes arguments. My husband, who supposedly loves me, sometimes gets cruel with his teasing me about the boogeyman. This hurts me because he just doesn't get it. I guess nobody does, but the dark side is frightening. I don't want any part of it, and I never want to go there. I just want my life back. My mother said I need to do whatever is best for me, even if that meant leaving my family and moving out on my own. I don't know. I just don't know what to do. Next story. We moved into our house about 3 years ago. The house was built sometime around the 1940s and used to be a bar called the Miners Inn until about 10 years ago. Since then, the house has been a ceramic shop, then two women ran a flower shop, and it was rumored that they were witches. The house has two levels. The top is the living area, and the bottom is concrete with tile on top. But the other half of the lower level is dirt. There were lots of symbols on the walls of what was the bar, but we painted over those with white paint, and we also disposed of the Ouija board we found there. The upstairs is normal, but we believe there is a guardian angel living there with us. She always watched over the little girl, my niece. The downstairs has a cold, uneasy feeling, even more so now that we were fixing it up down there. Concrete and more rooms, wires and all. Downstairs, my 5-year-old niece would see things, like a man with long ears. Like a bunny, she said, standing at the door. My sister, who is a recovering IV drug user, saw another sighting. She was doing drugs in the bathroom. She laid the drugs in the dryer and bent down. When she raised back up, her drugs were in the sink with the water on. She also said she saw the angel walk up to the door where she was sleeping and stare at her. It tried to scare her off. Mom, Dad, and I saw the angel walk around. We used to see her a lot, but not since we concreted up the downstairs. But this isn't the reason that I wanted to describe what I've been experiencing. Recently, we've heard, felt, and seen things downstairs. Disturbing things. Stuff to put your hair on ends. In the storage room, my mom was stacking extra cushions, and when she turned around, they fell. So she went to pick them up, and a powerful wind came by. It blew her hair back, and she saw bright colors, reds, blues, yellows, and their mixtures. It could not have been a window. There are none back there. Other things happened at night. When we're all upstairs, we hear noises like stuff knocking, feet on floor, bare feet, pops, cracks, and stuff dropping. But when we check it out, there are no signs of anything. I'm not one to let something like this scare me, but lately, when I go to bed, I have had a weird feeling. About 2 or 3 nights ago, something happened to me. I just turned off the light and closed my eyes when I heard a sound like a bare foot on the floor. It really spooked me. I have a lock on my room, so I reached over to my desk lamp, and right before I turned it on, a bright white light, like a ball shape with a weird tail thing behind it, streaked by. It was like a comet that came from the center of the room toward the bed. When I clicked the light on, I grabbed a sword I keep in my room, but nothing was there. So I put my sword down. When I went to go back to sleep, I left the light on. Every time I would close my eyes, I would hear the foot noise. Next story. We've had numerous encounters since we built our house on presently owned farmland. Our original house burned, and we rebuilt on the same land. However, the occurrences are more frequent in the most recent house. We, my entire family of 5, regularly hears footsteps on the hardwood stairs. Knockings on the glass patio door is also frequent, and no one is there, and our dog often growls and stares into air, and apparently nothing. A plant that sits on our entertainment center shakes for no reason at times. We frequently hear noises of something crashing to the floor when nothing has fallen. Whispers have become frequent also. My daughter recently saw a little girl of 6 or 7 years of age walking up the stairs into the recreation room. My daughter then heard a whisper behind her saying, "Don't be scared." My husband saw the same little girl sitting on the foot of our bed one morning. He described it the same way as my daughter, and both my husband and daughter had told me about the young girl separately, describing details that neither of them had discussed with each other. We often hear giggles of a child when one of us is laughing. Objects around the house have been placed and then found in a totally different location of the house. We've also smelled cologne that no one is familiar with. 3 members of the family have all separately felt something sit on the bed with them when no one is there. My husband has also seen a little girl crying in the hallway and thought it was our daughter. He bent over to pick her up and his arms went through her and she vanished. None of my family have ever been believers in this sort of thing, but occurrences are becoming so frequent and unexplainable that we have just considered selling the house and moving. Because what else can you do with a ghost, even if it's a little girl? Next story. The house I'm going to talk about is located on the outskirts of both Hilton and North Greece, New York. It was built in 1968. My parents and I moved into the house when it was brand new. Almost immediately, strange things started occurring. My uncle visiting from Ohio scared me to death one day after school. I did not know he was coming to visit, nor did I know that when I got into the house he was still there, until he peeked around the corner, and when I screamed, so did he. It seemed that about an hour earlier he was resting when he heard running footsteps up and down the stairs and in other portions of the house. As he investigated the house, he found no one there, so he locked himself in the bedroom, at least until I showed up. Then he told me what had happened to him. He was very shaken and his color was very ashen. This happened in 1968. Since that time to present, very strange occurrences have become normal. This incident in the basement, though, really scared me. Just my mother and I were in the house, and I went to the basement to get rid of cobwebs. Using an old lightweight vacuum cleaner, I started to clean the ceiling. It was warm down there, and the furnace was running on and off a lot. I must have finished half of the basement when I started seeing my breath. I turned off the vacuum, and I heard the furnace running. All of a sudden, this bone-chilling cold went through me. I went over to the furnace and felt the heat coming out of the vent. Right next to the furnace was the entrance to the half cellar. I was somehow drawn to look in there. Not seeing anything, by now the cold was almost disabling me. I ran upstairs, grabbed my camera, and what's surprising is it was warm upstairs. I ran back down into the basement, poked the digital camera through the entrance, and fired off 2 pictures. All I got for my troubles was just orbs. But there's something there, I know there is. Another strange thing also happened when I was taking those pictures. The rechargeable batteries were new and fully charged, which usually I can shoot off about 50 pictures. After I just shot 2, the camera went dead. I stayed at the house for about an hour afterwards upstairs, in which time I tried to turn the camera on. Nothing. My way home, I tried a couple more times and still got nothing. Then almost home, I tried again and the camera fired up. Later on, I counted the number of pictures I wasted with flash. I took 47 shots, which means the batteries were fully charged, and stayed that way until I wasted the energy. Attempts to take pictures in the basement after that proved futile. My mother now locks herself in her bedroom at night and leaves the TV on because she hears something walking the halls and some low talking sounds outside the door and walls of her room. Personally, besides that one time in the basement, I witnessed a vortex. With my daughter, we were both walking to the upstairs hall when we saw this huge dust-like vortex come out of the bathroom, down the hall, down the stairs, and turn right into the kitchen. After we recovered from the shock, we ran to the kitchen and asked my mother and my wife if they were all right and if they had seen anything. They were all right and hadn't seen anything. However, it was a hot day and suddenly, and for a brief moment, they felt an ice-cold breeze go by them. And next story. I've always been interested in listening to other people's ghostly encounters, but I had never actually experienced anything unusual myself until this, which has made me a little less skeptical. At the time of my encounter, I had recently landed a new job, which paid a lot more than what I was used to, so I moved into a house by myself closer to the CBD. The house was a nice little Queenslander, in an area with steep streets and a great view of the city itself. I loved it. It took me all day to get all my stuff in there with the help of a few of my mates who hung around into the night to help me settle in. It wasn't until after they left at around 11:30 p.m. that strange things began to happen. Alone for only about 5 minutes, I was in the kitchen cleaning up when suddenly I felt strange. For no reason at all. It was a feeling I can't accurately describe. Sort of like the feeling I get just after having deja vu, or when something during the day reminds me of a dream I had the night before. It wasn't a bad feeling, just strange, like I'd been in this place before, which I most certainly hadn't. Unable to shake this feeling, I decided I must have been tired. So after hunting for my toothbrush and paste, which was still packed, I went to bed. Lying there in the darkness, trying to ignore how I was feeling, I opened my eyes, which were facing the door of my bedroom. I saw a figure standing in the doorway, seemingly looking at me. I was frozen with fright and a little in disbelief. The figure, which was featureless, just a shadow in the dark, was only there for a few seconds. Then it turned and walked. I could hear it walking back out into the lounge room. I laid still, straining my ears to see if I could hear sounds coming from out there, but I heard nothing. Annoyed at how frightened I was, I decided that I should go out there and investigate. I'm not usually frightened, as I'm a reasonably sized man and can handle myself pretty well if need be. Firstly, turning the bedroom lights on, I walked quietly around the house, turning the other lights on as I went. I checked to see the doors front and back were still shut and the windows still closed as well, so nobody could have got in. Not wanting to go back to bed yet, I turned the telly on and watched it for a while. I soon thought that I was just imagining seeing the thing in the doorway, and convinced myself that it definitely couldn't have been a prowler or something like that, and it couldn't have been a ghost either because they didn't really exist. Back in bed with the light off again, I rolled over to face the wall this time. Just as I began to doze off, I started to get that strange feeling again. Then my bedroom door slammed shut by itself. Scared senseless, I jumped out of bed and tugged the door open. There he was again, this time face to face and up close. The figure was right in front of me. I could have reached out and touched him. I could see his face, but it was still too dark to make out his eyes. I stood there, one hand on the doorknob before I could do or say anything. The room opened its mouth, and a gargle, soft hissing sound came out. I slammed the door shut in its face, grabbed my keys, and jumped straight out of the bedroom window, ran up the side of the house into the streetlight where my car was. I got in as fast as I could and took off. When I got to my mate's place where I used to live, I beat on the door until he came and opened it. "What the hell happened to you?" he said. I realized for the first time that I wasn't wearing anything except for the undies I was sleeping in. When I told him what had happened, he thought I was crazy and wanted to go back to the house, but there was no way I was going back there that night. The next day I canceled my lease, which was supposed to be for 6 months, so I lost $1,300 worth of bond and rent. But I just couldn't bear the thought of another night in that house. The real estate agency said that had happened before with that house in the past, but the previous tenants hadn't had any problems. Looking back on the event now, over a year later, doesn't seem quite real, and I can't explain it to anyone without them thinking I'm crazy or something, but I know something definitely happened to make me react like that. I just don't know exactly what it was. Next story. I've had many experiences in my life which I can't explain. Some were surprising and some were as a result of an act like visiting the vampire's grave in West Greenwich, Rhode Island. This event just happened to be one of the most recent. Let me explain. I lived at an apartment complex called Osprey Links off of Town Center Boulevard and John Young Parkway. In building 13905, apartment 123, I had experienced some strange happenings. Everywhere from sounds coming from parts of the apartment I wasn't in at the time, to cold spots, to lights being on that I swore I turned off, only to find them on again. I lived alone and I figured these to be figments of my imagination, until one day, when my friend verified a strange occurrence. We were hanging out and we decided it was time to go out for some food. Now this apartment has French doors leading from the bedroom and dining room to a balcony. This is significant as when we returned the doors, which we remembered closing, and the light, which I asked her to turn off, were now open and on. We were in one of those funny states of shock, the "oh my god, that's too weird" states. We didn't really get scared as the building was practically brand new and nothing funky could have possibly happened in such a short amount of time. That was not the only unexplained experience. The worst one happened a few months later. It was late one night and I was watching TV. Nothing unusual there. My TV was in the bedroom and it was the only source of light while it was on. When I was ready for bed, I turned it off and the light from the TV was replaced by the glow from the street lights outside. This always gave the bedroom a creepy look. Shadows weren't a concern to me as I could always identify where they were coming from. This time was different. The shadow I saw was in the form of a man, and this isn't the first time I saw it. I saw this exact same form when I was 16 or 17 in the house we lived in at Coventry, Rhode Island. This time it was different, though. I was older, more skeptical, and didn't think that anything scary could faze me. This black shadow or form was definitely a human form. I assume a man because of the way it moved. After seeing it initially in the closet, it seemed to watch me for a minute or two and then moved from the closet, across the bedroom, and into the dining room, where I could no longer see it. It was at that precise moment, when I could no longer see it, that the streetlight which allowed me to see it went out. During this experience, I was pretty much frozen. I tried to move and say something. When it moved, I tried to scream, but I wasn't able to do even that. I eventually decided to just pass it off as an illusion and fell asleep. The next night, when the street lights came on, that one light was still out. While researching other sites on the subject of hauntings and other strange experiences, I found the following quote. The exact location is actually around the area of Young Parkway and Town Center Boulevard, area what used to be Indian lands and burial grounds. The construction work was halted upon the discovery of human remains and artifacts. There have been numerous sightings by the locals of apparitions, and in many of the houses that were built before the construction was stopped have had disturbances experienced in them. End quote. Could it be that something is following me? Could it be that my mother's ability to see things was passed on to me? Could it be that I'm just imagining all this? I don't know if I want an answer to the part that is a ghost.